Welcome to Just Go Grind, a show that focuses on helping you launch and grow a business and navigate the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Justin Gordon. In this episode, we have Tom Pardikes, who is the co-founder and CEO of GameSense Sports, developers of technology that tests and trains fast in-game decisions of athletes. And in this episode, we go through how Tom started this company, how they've grown it over time, getting professional sports teams to work with them initially through connections they have, why he decided to go through the Techstars Accelerator, how he's gone about building trust with the customers he has for GameSense Sports, and so much more in this episode. As always, the show notes are at justgogrind.com/podcast, and you can support the show by leaving a rating and review over an Apple Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Hawk Media, a full-service outsourced CMO based in Santa Monica, California, providing guidance, planning, and execution to grow brands of all sizes, industries, and business models. Hawk Media is recognized by Inc. as one of the fastest growing marketing consultancies, and their collaborative process, a la carte offering, and month-to-month fee structure give clients the flexibility they need to boost digital revenues and marketing ROI. Hawk Media, the company, has serviced over 1,500 brands of all sizes, ranging from startups like Tomorrow Melon, SIO Beauty, and Bottle Keeper to household names like Red Bull, Verizon Wireless, and Alibaba. And also, I had the founder and CEO of Hawk Media, Eric Huberman, on the podcast in episode number 23, if you want to take a listen. And to get a free consultation, head on over to hawkmedia.com and be sure to mention Just Go Grind. Without further ado, here is Tom Pardikes, co-founder and CEO of GameSense Sports. Tom, welcome to the show.
Justin, thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk with you.
Yeah, and looking at your company with GameSense, and there's so many things to kind of dive into. I'm curious because there's a lot of different products and kind of different offerings. For people who aren't familiar, what is GameSense? What are you doing with this company now?
GameSense really is a way to train the fast, reactive decisions that athletes make constantly on the court, the ice, the field, the pitch, and that are essential to athletic success. So when we think about, okay, what's an example of this? Easy one would be a baseball hitter trying to, hit a small white round object moving through the air at about 90 plus miles an hour, spinning with a round stick, right?
Yeah.
Really difficult, very fast, non-conscious decision and action that these guys have to do. And we see how difficult that is because if you're successful 3 out of 10 times, we consider you very good.
Yeah.
But that's a really difficult decision, should be physically impossible, but we're able to do it because we can anticipate accurately where that ball is going to be based on where we see it in the past. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're making decisions of that baseball. When do I need to put my bat there at what time when that ball is first leaving the pitcher's hands and prior.
With that in mind, being that's the goal, that's what you're trying to accomplish and helping improve that. I have to know, how are you doing this? I know you have videos and such, but I want to know a little bit more behind the scenes of this before we kind of dive into some other topics.
Mass repetition, increasing levels of difficulty, those are what's needed, and then immediate feedback. So we're just taking advantage of naturally how we learn. These videos that we're showing are highly specialized. So they're from a point of view of the hitter in this case, but they're cut off early. And that's because these actions have to start happening well in advance of you actually moving. So by focusing only on the very beginning of a scenario, you begin to pick up the cues that tell you, okay, what's going to happen as a result of this scenario, these cues I'm picking up. You interact with these videos over and over and over again. We're basically building up a database in our brain so that when you see an action, you're very good at anticipating what's the outcome. An example, not nearly as fast, but an example would be a master chess player comes up to the board and looks at it quickly and says, okay, boom, puts it down. I don't know what these moves would be or what they're called, but he puts it down right away, and they're, oh, that's a good move. He knows or she knows right away, just because they have these patterns built up in their brain. They can readily access, say, okay, based on this is a likely outcome. And so we provide these to the athletes. Again, they are interacting with them. They're training on them. It's just like going to the gym, lifting weights, just like doing anything else we do to become better athletes. It's another activity you do, and they get better at these really fast reactive skills.
With the actual platform, so when these athletes are interacting, I'm curious as to like how they're interacting, what that looks like from someone actually using GameSense, because I see the value in this as a former athlete myself, played college football, and like I see the value in, I mean, this type of thing, and especially if you're looking at a sport like baseball. How are they interacting with it on the video side, or what are they doing once they're using the product itself?
Right now, the key here is experience. You got to see these over and over and over again.
Of course.
So a phone is a really nice, convenient conduit for that, right? Platform. So you'll go on as an athlete. You select. Let's say we're working on pitch recognition. So we're going to select a pitcher. We know this guy has a nice slider, a good changeup, and a fastball about 80, 85 miles an hour. Select him. We go and we can choose our level of difficulty, and that difficulty level is really breaks down to how much of this pitch are you going to see. So the more you get to see, the easier it becomes. And then I'm just watching videos. So I see the pitch, he winds up, he delivers, boom, cuts off. Now, all right, that was a slider for a strike, up and in. And then I get the immediate feedback. That was right. And I can watch a replay that shows that entire pitch coming into the plate. And I'm building this recognition up, especially with the immediate feedback. That's really important. Okay, no, I was wrong. That was actually a change up that was high. Now I can go back and see, okay, what is that? Oh, I see the entire pitch. And I can see, now I go back and say, oh, okay, I see this grip now. Okay, now in the future, when I see that grip, hopefully I can recognize that and understand, here comes a changeup. And you go through 5 minutes a day, you get about 30 pitches in. Again, if we're just talking about pitch recognition or serve recognition. And you've just done some training. It's just like you've gone and you've just hit off the tee for 30 minutes.
Right. Just like any athlete would do with their training, shooting a basketball for a certain amount of time and all of that. It seems like, yeah, the mental side of training is everything. I mean, in terms of as it's evolved, especially now looking at 2020 and how the mental side, whether it be from being able to focus in the actual game situations in something like this case with GameSense and being able to find those minute details that allow you to increase your percentages of success a little bit more, which is everything in a sport like baseball. I have to know, how did this get started? How did GameSense get started? Because obviously it's come a long way, it seems like. How did it get started in the first place, though?
Well, this technology has been out there for about 4 decades. The technology comes out of the sports science labs, kind of dancing around. Okay, what makes an expert, right? How do these guys make these decisions, fast decisions that novices have no idea about? And what developed was this, what's called temporal occlusion, which kind of I went over earlier, and spatial occlusion. But temporal occlusion meaning we're going to cut it off at one point, and then we're going to anticipate the outcome. The problem is that nobody, 40 years, right? Never heard anything like this, I assume.
Yeah.
And it seems so obvious, but that's often the disconnect between science and application, commercialism. So it was out there. People were certainly doing it from an academic standpoint. There were some early companies out there who tried to create something more with this and apply this. And then I came out of psychology, biological psychology, studying really reflexive actions, but also being an athlete for much of my life. Coming out of that program, realizing that I really did not want to become a professor or do research per se, but I really wanted to apply all of this stuff that I've been learning. And in doing so, I started in kind of down the sports performance, sports psychology realm, trying to help athletes with the traditional sports improvement, sports psychology, sports performance. And doing that, loving that kind of stuff, because I really liked that realm of it too, especially when you start to look at like physiological response, heart rate, autonomic response, right? I love that. But I saw this opportunity that it seemed to me wide open, which was decision making, which is also psychological, obviously, cognitive.
Yeah.
but something we've never thought about. And certainly we think a lot about strategy, but you're right. All right. It's a 3-2 count. This guy likes to throw a lot of fastballs up and in during that. Be ready for that. Or
Yeah.
it's a 3rd and 4. They come out in a 3 receiver set. What percentages are we going to be looking at? What are they going to run? That was already out there because we have all this data that helps us. But that's not what we were thinking, or what I was thinking at that point. We were thinking about these really fast, reactive decisions that you can't rely on stats per se, because you don't have time to think about that stuff. So these fast, reactive decisions, what we were really interested in. Nobody had been doing it. I was kind of the first one I actually started thinking about was actually baseball and pitch recognition and
Yeah.
swinging and recognizing that baseball coming in. I played baseball for a while, and I started researching people. And a couple names continued coming up. Gray out of Arizona State, and a guy named Fatty. I don't even know how to pronounce it at that time. And they were doing some really cool stuff. Kind of in the VR realm and not in the VR realm, right? Because you're trying to think about, okay, how do we replicate this? How do we kind of think about this whole scenario? And one of my other partners who I was working with at the time, we were doing more of the physiology and more of general perceptual cognitive training, uh, said, "Oh, I know Peter. I know Dr. Fatty." I said, "Well, like heck, let's talk to him." So we ended up all meeting together down in Naples, Florida. He was on a road trip. I was down there visiting other partner Len Zykowski. And our first foray into this, we decided, well, let's just see what we can do here, was actually tennis serve recognition. So we filmed a tennis server hitting, thinking about how we could start to apply this. Then we were all wrangled into another company uh, to try to decipher just this problem we're talking about, which is the ability to do. This guy wanted to do virtual baseball, which is actually a really interesting idea. So to kind of compete virtually with people throwing and hitting virtual objects. And we thought that was really cool. But we saw this other opportunity, this fast reactive decision making kind of just sitting there that was a lot easier to implement and wide open, right? Nobody was touching it. And I think he was not really interested in that. So we never worked, we didn't go very far with that company. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to it even. But we came out of that experience thinking, man, we just need to do this ourselves. And we didn't really have any business acumen, which showed its head pretty quickly. But I was the youngest, the freest to do anything, so I was tasked with trying to figure out the business end of it more, while Peter was tasked and Len was tasked with trying to figure out the science end of it more. But really, we were just going at this together. There was not really a whole lot of division, truthfully, because we both had visions in both of those realms. And from the start, we were able to create a rudimentary MVP, really rudimentary though. But we were lucky to get in with some MLB teams and some major college teams right from the start.
How'd you do that? It's a big deal. It's like you can't just gloss over that. How'd you get in with these professional teams, Tom?
Yeah, networks, connections, just like we were talking about earlier, right? It's not what you know,
Yeah.
it's who you know. So we knew some of these people. They were familiar with Peter's work in this area, and so they decided to give it a go. And that helped us, and a lot of chance too. A lot of just like Peter tells a story about meeting some guy in a bus, or pardon me, a train, who happened to be the general manager for the Southern Illinois Miners, and being able to start filming and collecting data and content with them. You know, he had never heard of anything like this, but he was intrigued enough to, yeah, let's try this, and it worked. So that's always a good convert, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned the MVP, very, very basic. I mean, what was that? What did it consist of at the time, the MVP?
It was all web. The streaming was horrendous. You couldn't download anything, so you relied on really high-end internet because these are really big videos. The UX UI is not quality, let's say,
Yeah.
very basic, bugs all over the place, and we were able to convince these guys to keep on trying it and to work through those bugs. I know we only had 6 pitchers at the time, which is not much. You get pretty bored with those guys pretty quickly. But it was enough to convince people that this was something legitimate. And from there, we were able to expand the number of the content, right? How many pictures we had. We were able to improve the UX. We were able to release then iOS mobile device that allowed you to download the drills now at this point.
Yeah.
So you weren't relying on the streaming. Yeah, continued improvement, continued features. We had leaderboards, everything we could do. We're still working on that. That's still a thorn in our side that we need to solve, and we're trying to solve by making it more interactive, better, expanding content. Everything that our users want out of
Yeah,
it.
the gamification seems like a really big piece potentially. People who are just competitive and like you want to practice. So if you have some competition, I know from using apps like Duolingo for language learning, where there's leaderboards and stuff, that definitely kept me going way more than anything else. And it seems like with this type of thing too, in this situation, like you want to be better, and with working with athletes who are already super competitive, to have that gamification type of piece would be really interesting. One thing I want to go back to
Yeah,
quickly though
absolutely.
is on the tech side, who was building the tech? Who was building the site, the app as you went along? Like, how'd you get the tech side built?
We were able to partner with one of my old friends who was a programmer and convince him to start helping us build this. So that was fun. Named Paul Kohoff.
Oh, thank God
So
for
he
Paul.
was right with us from the start. Yeah.
And one thing too, like with this, I mean, we look at entrepreneurs building companies. There's the idea of bootstrapping, raising money. There's obviously many different options. There's family and friends you can go through in terms of trying to raise even like just a loan. How did you finance it initially, Tom?
Great question. And that is a big question. So we had some micro loans from friends and family, but I mean micro, 5,000. So with two of those, so 10,000, we
Yeah.
essentially built this originally. Not much, right? Um, and then from there, like I said, from the start, we were able to convince people to do it, and we got paid by them. A lot more than we would have been paid these days, and we charge these days. But it buoyed us and allowed us to start developing more, paying people to do what we needed them to do, get more content. So yeah, it was really $10,000 from the very beginning, and then customer financed. And then we recently did a little more bridge round too, to get some more money in the coffers for us to develop some more. Still customer financed, and now we're raising a seed round, or we're just beginning that process to bump it up to the next level.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, I just talked to I'm talking to entrepreneurs every day, but one of the ones with the episode that went out live today, which we're recording this will go out later, but on September 23rd, and he's raised 30 plus million, and it's just there's so many stages you go through in that funding, like going from the initial. He mentioned it was Holger, the founder of Blinkist. He mentioned when he started. They got $150,000, which you mentioned your 10,000, like 150,000. They thought that was like, oh my God, how did this happen? How did we get 150,000? Like, this is like someone gave us this much money to build this company,
Yeah.
and it's just we hear these valuations and how much people are fundraising now, and it makes it seem like, well, that's what everyone's doing, but you don't start with that much necessarily. It is these things that go unsaid, like the first 10 grand you got, which I'm sure was so helpful
Yeah.
along the way. And one thing too, with going through an accelerator, how did you decide to go through an accelerator?
Well, I think there's a value to it, um, and I know we're seeing that value now. We've just gotten out of it. An accelerator is kind of like investors in some ways, and these early people you work with and partners even you work with are customers, that they're going to help you in this path and honing what you're doing, so you're not spinning your wheels or going down blind alleys. So you're working with people that have been there and done that and can really help you. Techstars, I think, is a tremendous accelerator,
Absolutely.
um, and especially when it's a sports specific accelerator. So our connections, the networking we had, the knowledge we gained from everybody involved in it is invaluable and has been invaluable. Another thing I've heard about it too is that this is not just a kind of a one-time thing. This is going to continue, and we've already seen that as well. So the accelerator we got just lucky. I don't think anybody expects to get into Techstars, truthfully. So we were really surprised by that, and had to rearrange some things as a result of that, but we happily did. Unfortunately, right when we were supposed to go down, so this is in Australia, Melbourne,
Yeah.
they say, just right before we were supposed to go down there for 3 months, which would have been pretty cool, they shut their borders, and the program became virtual.
Wow.
Yeah, but again, incredibly valuable, even in a virtual format.
Yeah, and I've interviewed a number of people who have gone through Techstars, and they really harp on that network, and that being, one of the biggest value adds for them for going through an accelerator. One thing I have to ask about though, before going to Techstars, you said it was lucky you got in, or it's hard to get in these accelerators, especially the top ones that just accept a small percentage. What kind of traction did you have when you got into Techstars, or where was the business at that point that you got in?
Yeah, we were developing. I mean, that we didn't need to be in Techstars to continue growing, and we didn't think. I mean, we apply for certain accelerators prior to that? Yeah, but not seriously ever. And this one, we just continue to refine that process, get better and better, and know what we're doing, talking about. But we were going full steam. I think we needed where we're at right now is not super different than where we were at prior to Techstars. I think the goals have more or less remained the same. Um, but it has definitely supercharged us getting out of the gates here. So it's there's no doubt it's added quite a bit of velocity to our trajectory that we were heading on before it. So that's what we were looking for, is that boost.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one of the things that, just to go back on a little bit too, with early on in the business, I mean, you mentioned being able to grow off of revenue as well after the initial 10,000 to help build out the MVP, and then through your connections, getting the professional sports teams on board. What was the business model? You said you're getting paid. What was the business? How are you charging people? What was the revenue model? I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was B2B. That's what we were doing. We always had this grandiose vision of B2C, but that is really difficult to do. It's a
Yeah.
longer sales cycle with the B2B, no doubt, but you're talking about bigger checks, bigger opportunities there. So we've always were B2B. B2C was an afterthought, and we're actually going to more of a B2B2C model now. So we're looking to find large distributors. So in baseball and softball, examples would be entities that put on large tournaments, showcase events
Yeah.
that bring in thousands of people. Those kind of guys. Even facilities that train individuals. Well, that's a little bit on the smaller end of that. And then governing bodies is another one that we're trying to interact with. So on the tennis side, that's people like USTA or Tennis Australia. We're fortunate enough to already be partnered with Softball Australia, so those guys are in charge of softball for all of Australia. It's a nice partner to have.
Yeah.
That we feel is the best bang for our buck. It still is tough, and probably even getting tougher to go directly after consumers. Another thing that we found is that because we have a new market, a new product, and are opening up a new market, really, people don't even know what the heck this is.
Yeah.
So there's a long education component to this that we have to do, and that's really tough to do. We think with just advertising and trying to get to people one to one. You do need this networking again. Back to the word of the day, right?
Go figure.
Where people are talking about it, right? And a lot of people are exposed to it, and coaches are talking about it, and then that helps proliferate that and people get comfortable with these concepts and what we're doing.
Tom, on the educational side, I mean, how are you going about that? I know you just briefly talked a little bit about, but I would like to dive a little bit deeper into how you're going about educating people about this when it is kind of this new product, in terms of how you're doing it. Because I know there's other entrepreneurs who have ideas and similar thing where it's something that's new. There's a big educational piece of it, and I've interviewed some people in the past as well on that same thing. How are you going about it for GameSense in terms of the educational component of it then?
Yeah, I think we're not so different than other people. We're trying to create content, put that content out there in the world that people can readily access. social media, on our website, bringing people into the website. One thing we see is that nobody's really searching for pitch recognition per se, right? That's
Yeah.
not a big search term, or serve recognition, but people are looking at reaction and decisions. And so we try to bring those people in, and that seems to work pretty well. I think we can, we just got to keep on pushing that boulder up the hill. People understand it more and more. I think the distribution helps in that way too, that regard, where we can put that out in the hands of our partners. They can put it out to people, and it adds instant credibility. The content needs to be palatable enough.
Yeah.
And I think another way that we've really tried to do this, and this is a key, I think, actually, is creating a metric, creating something that people care about, that this means. So, we talk about 40 time or 40-yard dash, or if we're talking about football and other sports too, how fast are you?
Right.
Well, that's something that means something. And that's something that anybody can go out and measure. What we don't have right now are these metrics. How well do you recognize blitzes? How well do you recognize cover two as a quarterback? Right?
Yep.
How well do you recognize a run or pass as a linebacker? Those kind of metrics. Those are very difficult to measure. So, but they're not actually. Traditionally, they are. We can measure those. So by establishing a metric, a test out there, which is again bolstered and helped by our partnership program, people start to recognize this more, and I think are more appreciative and understand the value of what we're trying to do. And so once we get to that point, then education, I don't want to say full saturation, but depending on how common it is, but then I think we've done our job to the point where people are asking about this, right? Are interested in what this is, and how do I get better at it? It's part of your profile as an athlete.
One of the things you talked about, Tom, was this idea of distribution and having, whether it be these big showcases that have tons of athletes and coaches at, or even like the smaller gyms potentially with these trainers more directly. How do you think about the distribution in terms of almost like getting validation from very highly trustworthy sources that can then help you in terms of your validation, where people say, oh, this coach and this coach and this coach recommend GameSense, where that leads you to have more credibility? Like, how do you look at that side of things with GameSense?
Well, I think that's incredibly important. That's exactly what we're trying to do. It's difficult to earn trust, and we know that's a huge factor in behavior. So if we're trying to get people to buy and use our product, they need that trust. If coaches are doing it, because those are the people they're turning to anyways, right?
Yeah.
When athletes are trying to get better, they're turning to experts. So once experts believe in this, use it, which a portion of the population absolutely do, but those are the early adopters still. I think right now, and this is when you ask, but we're crossing that chasm a bit.
Yeah.
Right into the mainstream, and where people readily accept that. But early adopters are definitely into it and are proselytizing and evangelizing, if that's even a word. What, evangelizing? Yeah, I can't.
We'll roll with it.
Yeah, they're evangelists.
Exactly.
They're out there talking to people. They are the people that people are listening to anyway. So that's a perfect scenario for us. And once any product can achieve that, that's really where they want to be.
Oh, absolutely. And those are those testimonials you can use for your marketing, your validation, moving forward for a long time until you see these products. And you'll see people do, beta tests or beta launches, or they have a special group that starts, because then they can use that feedback and those insights from those first people then to sell the next people. And then it kind of goes from there. And I thought of like Eric Cressy right away, of course, from like sports performance, baseball standpoint, with this in terms of thinking about who he works with. There's so many people like that are out there. Like I have an exercise sports science degree from undergrad, and I interned with Todd Durkin at Fitness Quest 10. We worked with a lot of athletes, and whenever he had his stamp on something, I mean, people definitely cared about that. And because he has a following, it was like, oh yeah, whatever he says, people are down with, and that's how you can get growth pretty quickly through working with people like that. It seems like as well. And with your company, it's been around 5 years or so. I mean, how has the dynamic with your co-founders and like your team, how has that gone as you've grown? Like how has your team expanded? How have you kind of approached hiring for the team?
Well, we've definitely expanded. We've added actually a new C-level person. That was about a year ago. And that was a great move. More business-minded, business experience. And then from there, we've always just done kind of contractors. And as we move in as we gain more money, get funding, that will certainly change. We're anxious to bring either these contractors in as full-time employees or to go find full-time employees. I think the dynamics are always changing. And as you get, how could they not, right? As a small organization, you have a specific set of dynamics and I don't know, protocols. As you get bigger, those have to change. Uh, there are certain things that you don't want to change, but other things absolutely have to change. I was just actually listening about, was it Reed from Netflix, who
Yeah,
was
Reed
saying
Hastings.
that, yeah, Reed Hastings. Um, how do you keep this innovation? I think he was talking about he sees that when companies grow larger, that they can't maintain this innovation because basically large organizations need structure, right? They need some type of organization. That's why it's an organization,
Yeah.
um, and that's just how it's always worked. So how do you maintain that innovation? How do you maintain that variety and spontaneity in these organizations? And that's tough. And the jury's still out for Netflix if they can, as they continue to grow, if they can maintain that. It seems like they've done it all right so far. And what he said is that you always have to be comfortable with flying. I don't think he said this exactly, but I'll translate. Flying close to the sun, I think,
Yeah.
that this could, you need that chaos, but it's got to be ordered chaos. So things have certainly changed, and they'll continue to change. And I like it, and I don't like it at the same time. The organization is good. You need to be organized, but it's almost like you become too structured and too rigid in your approaches to problems and people.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's interesting to look at companies that if they don't, like I say, if they don't innovate, I mean, you die. There's a whole thing around that. And in a similar vein, you think about media companies. I'm thinking about Disney. I mean, if Disney hadn't decided to really go on this streaming route, I mean, you don't predict a global pandemic, obviously, but when they shut down all their, I mean, think about where they would be if they hadn't tried to continue to innovate, to continue to expand and do different things. I mean, they would be so screwed right now. And
They sure
just
would
look
be.
at the environment. And that's because you have to kind of constantly be thinking about what that next thing is going to be. And I don't know if it was a Jeff Bezos thing or someone mentioning about basically, trying to put yourself out of business with your innovation, thinking about those things that would potentially put yourself out of business with other competitors. Like, how can you innovate on that yourself? And then in doing that, you find more and more ways to grow, and you may have to cannibalize eventually parts of your business through that help you then grow overall. And it's just, there's so many decisions kind of to be made around that. And with GameSense, with have a number of different products. You mentioned different sports as well. How are you looking at where you want to take this technology in terms of what sports you'll offer it? I'm really curious about that because I know your baseball and softball seem to be your sweet spot. But how do you look at like different sports as well?
Yeah, good question. Um, well, this is so applicable to so many sports. So baseball and softball have been the beachhead for this.
Yeah.
And within baseball and softball, we've only talked about pitch recognition. But in reality, pickoff moves are the exact same idea. Grounders, fly balls, exact same
Mm,
idea.
yeah.
So we could go deeper into each of these sports. Pickoff moves don't apply to softball. Number one. Number two, we've just finished a pilot with Tennis Australia for our new tennis serve recognition app, and that's pretty cool. We really enjoyed making that, and we built this platform purposely to be agnostic, where we can kind of plug and play. So the tennis is now out there. That's still in a beta phase, and we're going to continue to develop that. I think as a founder, you've always got to be hesitant to overextend resources. So I think we're probably going to stay pat in these three sports for a bit, really
Yeah.
dive deep and establish ourselves in these. Who knows? I mean, if we have a lot of money coming out, we could definitely expand into other sports. But we'll probably really focus on those. In the future, though, there's a lot of applications. So these baseball pitch recognition, serve, softball pitch recognition, tennis serve recognition. Those are really fast reactions, and those are called ballistic speed decisions. So, Justin, let me ask you, where do you think would be another application to something traveling at you at a high speed that you have to interact with?
Well, I say I'm half cheating. I would say volleyball would be another potential one, or soccer.
Absolutely, absolutely, yep. And so, soccer is a huge market, obviously, and soccer could be applicable to some other things. We'll get back to that in a second. One of the most popular and widely played sports in the world is another really good opportunity, and that's cricket.
Cricket, yeah, yep.
So that we could see an expansion of that. Volleyball is definitely on our list. Soccer, or football, as they call it in the rest of the world, is definitely on our list as well. Expanding from there, you can start to think about, okay, what are we still talking about the same decisions when a point guard is dribbling up the court? He's at the top of the key, and there's a defender here, here, and here, and teammates here, here, and here, and they are initiating their actions. What do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, those are the same kind of decisions. These are called patterns of play, right? And so this is equivalent to when things are moving in a specific way. A football play sets up like this, or a soccer play, or a basketball play. Those are other areas that we really want to get into as well. And then another thing is esports. We feel is capable.
Yeah.
We're capable of diving into that realm too. And then further continue this expansion, because this really does apply to so many things. Law enforcement, armed forces, even interview process, right? So
Yeah.
if you have a specific uh, body language or facial expressions or speech patterns, those mean things. And you're making these decisions, these kind of non-conscious decisions are influencing your behavior and then actions. So we feel that there's a lot of ways this can go. Now, in terms of the future, as technology evolves, I this really is a replication of experience when you get down to it. So we're trying to simulate some portion of something you're doing, right? Experience, an action you're doing.
Right.
So this lends itself ultimately to immersive environments, right? VR, caves. And that's where it will go at one point for sure. That's I think far down in the future. That's certainly a few years out, I would say. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm wrong. And I think it's even further out when we start to consider the access people have to the technology. So it's a decade out before, I don't know, a tenth of the population has VR headsets that can do anything with this, much less cave.
Yeah, unless there's a monumental increase in the technology where the price is so cheap and the experience is so good that it evolved before then. But yeah, as it currently looks and how it's going, like it seems a far ways out.
Yeah, and that could be, you're exactly right. It all depends on cost and the ability to get in the technology and the fidelity of it. So that could be different. I don't see that, again, the widespread distribution. What we see too is that the phones are widely spread throughout the world.
Right.
And this is something that is still pretty good and still can really help you quite a bit. So we're really focusing on the 2D aspect of this, with an understanding that 3D and the VR is there, and we're actually going to be experimenting within that, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, being said, I think it's interesting that there's so many ways you can go with the technology with GameSense. And if you look at other entrepreneurs and having kind of the same almost dilemma of like, yeah, this can apply to so many areas, and you start in one area, you have to, have that focus. And you obviously have started with that focus with baseball and softball, and you mentioned tennis. with all these different markets though, with soccer, with volleyball, with different esports, whatever, I'm curious as to like, are you thinking about it from a market size? Like, what are the factors? Is it market size? Is it, what you can execute on, where you have context? And like, I'm just curious as to like, what are some of those factors you're thinking through as you're deciding on which markets are going to potentially be next? Because I know there's other entrepreneurs who could have value from this type of thought process, at least for how to even think about this type of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a equation you're dealing with, right? You got to make sure that you make money at the end. So I think all three of those that you mentioned, it's the location of it, right? Do you have to go into a foreign market? It's tougher. But
Yeah.
if you have connections or feet on the ground there, that makes it easier. It's the size of that market. Like we said, cricket, huge. Soccer, huge. Table tennis is actually huge. Does that mean we'll go into table tennis? I don't know. Maybe, but it's a huge sport.
Yeah.
Volleyball is big. Ice hockey, not so much. But there are other, but maybe we know somebody there. And then the last one is that the transference, right? Um, how easy is it to transfer your technology and the concepts to another sport? So we were talking about earlier cricket. Yep, that makes a lot of sense from a baseball perspective. Soccer goalie, a hockey goalie, those all make sense in what we're doing. Um, but it's all three of those.
Yeah.
We've certainly have some ideas, and we'll let the chips fall where they may when we kind of make those decisions, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this algorithm of sorts to decide on new markets, and being strategic with that, because you can, if you making the wrong decision on that, it can hold you back potentially. It can be more trouble than you thought it was going to be. Cash always a concern. That's why when I look at other companies and how they've executed, if you look at whether you like them or not, but looking at a company like Uber and how they executed city by city and the strategy that went behind that, I mean, it was pretty impressive to look
Yeah.
at how they've done it, and just from a pure like business perspective, that's interesting. Even looking back in the day with Facebook and them going to, university by university, and if a university didn't take it, they'd go to a nearby university, and then the other universities would want the product. So it's like that strategy is fascinating to me. So I'm always kind of curious about that. And one thing I want to discuss briefly too, like, you hadn't been a founder before. You had all this experience in the psychology and in sports, but you weren't a founder before. How, what's been, I guess, the biggest challenge of being this first time founder?
Is everything an acceptable answer?
That's one.
Justin, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. There's no doubt about that. And I think previous founders know that already, right? So they're willing to put in the time, the effort, knowing that this is going to be a really tough and long slog, most likely. So I'm learning this now. I've relied on other people to help me through this for sure. I think the key to any successes we have is the team. So you have to have a team there that has done that. It's really tough to do it. And we were doing it for a while, certainly with some aspect of it, but people who've never done this before, that's really
Yeah.
tough. And you need that learning experience to start to understand. So, but when you have experts and advisors there that have already done that, now you don't need to learn that, right? You can learn it vicariously through what they've already done. So it's definitely tough. And even if you said, okay, you're going to be a business person 15 years ago, I would have said, whatever. I would have never imagined that.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love business. I think one of the reasons is because it involves two of my favorite subjects: math. In the end, the numbers have to be there, and psychology and behavior. In the end, business really is, in my opinion, is influencing thought and behavior.
Yeah. I mean, that's everything. I mean, you look at everything and it's all a buying decision, a purchase decision. Why would a user use this product? Why would they continue to? Why would they, how do you evolve retention around that? And, if I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary, the new one about the social dilemma. There's so much on that side of things in terms of business, the psychology, and why people are doing what they do. And people are just trying to influence that in terms of business, which becomes a very interesting game to play. Indeed. And one thing I'm always curious about, especially even with first time founders as well. I mean, you mentioned people have been helpful for you, and the network is huge, as we've talked about earlier and before the interview. But in terms of books, have there been any books that have been helpful, personal or professional for you?
You know, kind of a cop out. I read books and I like to read books. I don't get to read books as much as I'd like. And there
Sure.
have certainly one, you can't, what is it? You can't teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar, something like that. There was an old one. Oh gosh, a really old one. What is it? It's like how to win friends and
Friends and
influence
influence
people.
people. Yeah.
Carnegie, I want to say. That was, I just recently read that and I was like, oh man, this is really obvious, and I think it's absolutely true. Uh, but then I read The Economist pretty religiously, and I'd never read The Economist, which is a magazine. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
Um, and it has all kinds of stuff. It's tough for me to read only business or only that, but it's all there. And I think as you also need to understand what's going on in the world as well. So I think that's really helped me quite a bit. Another one that I recently was about culture. And I'm sorry, I can't remember. The guy he likes rap.
Oh, Ben Horowitz. What you do is who
Yeah,
you are, I think it is.
precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly right. That's a really good book too. I like that. I remember when I was first getting into this was The Art of War, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's it's a good one.
Yeah, which is also really interesting. It does apply itself to it. And I often find myself going back and thinking about some of those principles in that book. Um,
I think
no,
there's something to be.
I'd like to read more. I wish I had more time. And then today we read a lot of articles too, online.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's a huge part of it. And whether it be you're reading, blogs or people are, there's a lot of really good newsletters out there. I'll give another plug for Holger and his company Blinkist. They have 15 million users, and that they're all basically small bites of nonfiction. So like the best reviews of nonfiction books for that exact purpose. They want to help people learn. And for entrepreneurs, a lot of times, strapped for time, that learning may be through like Audible with audiobooks. It may be through podcasts. It may be through just quick bites type of thing, like with Blinkist, or like you mentioned, The Economist and all these different news sources, whatever it may be, like finding whatever works for you as an entrepreneur, where you can kind of continue to learn and progress. Because there's a lot of obviously doing on a day-to-day basis with a company. When you're a founder, you're dealing with people, thinking of strategy, all of that, but then also continuing to learn and add perspectives, I think is interesting and important as well. And
Absolutely.
one of the last things I want to ask about, Tom, is just how do you recharge away from work?
I think that's a real key. You can't go full speed for very long, and we're forced to often. Even you how often do you fall asleep thinking about stuff, or you can't sleep as a result, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you begin thinking about it, and that prevents you from going back to sleep constantly, right?
Yeah, all the time.
So I think it's really, really, really important to just be able to shut off. And one of those times for me is actually quite frequent, and I think it's needed. And I've tried to, and anybody who works with me is I encourage the same. I take portions of Friday and part of the weekend off completely, and it's for me it's out of necessity because that's the day I have to. Our son is at home,
Yeah.
and we're both working parents working from home, but I take several hours that day, and we're doing something together. So that's really nice because I'm forced not to think about. Sure, work creeps in every once in a while, but I'm not thinking about it too much because I'm getting to play with my son. So that's one way. And then I think I try to go kind of off the grid every once in a while as well to really get out there and force yourself not to think about it. And that's really when some of the best ideas come to you,
Oh yeah.
you know? So we're fortunate. I grew up in Colorado. I really like being outdoors. It's a cool area out here. So hiking is a big thing for me. Um, and yeah, what else? Riding bikes. What do you do? I'm sure you have
Yeah.
some things you got to do for stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have a few things. To your point of kind of being off the grid. I mean, I just went on literally last weekend, went on a mini road trip just for a day, just to get out of LA. I went to Monterey, up the
Nice.
coast. It was like a 6-7 hour drive
Yeah.
with my best friend who's been on the podcast, Zach. And it was just to that exact point of more ideas come from when you're not just in the day-to-day of work. And even yesterday is another example. I spent like a couple hours at a park with just a notebook and
Nice.
thinking through strategy of what I wanted to do, because there's so many ways you can go with your business, just like you mentioned with GameSense and all these different industries, that I find the kind of the writing, journaling portion super helpful for me. And then the last bit being, anytime I can play something, like I'm a big fan of board games, so like playing like Settlers of Catan or something like that, that just you can't think about work because you're so engrossed in the game itself.
Yeah.
And those types of things I think help the most, where you just really can't think about business because it's on your mind like 24/7 otherwise. And I think for me, that's been helpful.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I'm a musician too. I forgot about that. So I definitely pick a guitar and start to play a bit. I used to play Ultimate Frisbee. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Oh yeah, I played it before. It's a lot of fun.
Not so much anymore.
Different.
Too old for that. I think, you bring up a really good point too, Justin, and that's about, you're in a park with a notebook. I assume you had your phone?
I did, but it was shut off.
There you go. So, and I get in trouble for doing this sometimes because at points I just need to put my head down, right? And I don't need this distraction. And I think it's so easy for us to be, and we see it, be lured away attentionally. I'm doing something. Oh, what was that ding? So I'm a really big proponent. I'm older anyways. So I didn't even have a cell phone until I was probably like 33.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long time ago. But I'm definitely a big proponent of just not having my phone on me. I know my partners and business partners get mad at me for that, because we need to, often speed is key to this, no doubt about it. But back to the point, just on all the time, just unsustainable for us. And you'll see the result in other consequences that come out of that.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, it's also thinking about the big picture. And with a startup, with a company, this is not something that it's a 6-month project. I mean, these things take years and years. And a lot of people will spend, they may spend decades potentially in their company, depending on what it is. And depending on, obviously, if it's VC backed, there's different pressures on getting an exit and everything. But you could spend a very, very long time on this. And if you look at, I'm missing a little bit of the day-to-day with having my phone off to have my mental clarity and mental health so I can perform for years and years and years at a very high level, it's like, that's worth it completely.
That's a good point. It's really an investment, right?
Yeah.
I'll spend an hour today to save 60 minutes over 2 weeks or whatever, or a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very true.
And Tom, where can people go to learn more about GameSense and connect with you if they want as well?
Yeah, absolutely. GameSenseSports.com. Come visit us and check it out. And certainly our information is on there. You can contact me directly. I'd love to talk about fast reactive decision making with anybody out there.
Perfect. I will be sure to link all the things we mentioned here in the show notes at justgogrind.com/podcast, all the socials and everything for GameSense Sports as well. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Justin, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Just Go Grind. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. The Weekly Grind, which is my weekly newsletter, comes out every single Friday. You can find it at justgogrind.com/newsletter. This is filled with tips, tools, and strategies for growing your business. If you want to know how to launch a business, how to grow it, how to get it off the ground, find employees, all these different things. There's a few tips, tools, and strategies every single week I deliver right to you. justgogrind.com/newsletter. Check it out. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you in the next episode.